So then, thank you. I'm very happy to have you all here and to have your expertise bundled, because I need your help for this session. I experienced or learned about the concept the past few weeks. I learned this concept. I tried to improve the concept. I think I managed to do it. But yeah, I'm curious about your feedback after this talk. I am very glad that you haven't left this talk already, since you have written that about template-driven forms. And yeah, I want to talk about why I think we underestimated template-driven forms a bit the last couple of years, and why I think we can still use template-driven forms in our enterprise projects, and why I think template-driven forms can be even more type-safe than reactive forms. But yeah, we get to that in just a second. So yeah, basically, I really enjoy creating forms or developing forms in Angular because I think Angular already did a very good job in providing us primitives to build forms, because they took care about the structure, they took care about validation, and so on and so forth. They took care about asynchronous stuff. So basically, this is a cool thing. But I'm not sure if you are that happy with the form story currently in Angular. So when I develop in Angular forms, I find myself in building abstractions or helpers that make me more productive or more effective in creating forms. So it's never that I can just use it right away and then everything's done. And that's why I thought about, okay, how can we make this better? And today I want to talk about the evolution in forms in Angular, because there are a few bits to tell. And then I want to introduce you to a new concept that I call schema-driven forms. And then when we have learned everything about this, we just come to our takeaways or our learnings, and then we will have pizza together. So everything started with AngularJS, basically. In 2010, we had ngModel and AngularJS, so there was only the one way in using template-driven forms. And this was already a cool thing, right? So you had this ngModel that took care about the data binding, the automatic updates. The things only got a little bit frustrating if you tend to add more and more validators to your templates. And then you had custom logic to introduce. And it was like a bloat in your template. And it was not that funny anymore to write template-driven forms. With Angular in 2016, we got, next to the template-driven forms, also the reactive forms. And reactive forms were just approach to have the logic of a form more tightly coupled to the TypeScript code and to do all the customizations there. And I think this already tells the story of the most disliked things about template-driven forms. In template-driven forms, you have a scattered structure. You do something in the template, and then you do something in your TypeScript code. And bringing this together is like a very high cognitive load, even when it comes to a lot of customization. Then our templates also got very, very big or too big, and it was very heavy to extract them into other components and then connect them or wire them back to the form again. It was very frustrating at some point. And then, I'm not sure, when you started with Angular, and you tried to render a list of form controls, and then you Googled it for that, you haven't found anything in template-driven forms how you have to deal with control arrays, because template-driven forms currently do not support arrays at all. So you have to work around about this issue. And if you have talk about control arrays and you Google for that, what you find is the reactive forms, because reactive forms have this concept of the form array where we can deal with lists of controls right away. And I think this is already like a search engine optimization thing why a lot of folks are using reactive forms. It was also a little bit more convenient at a first glance to create those forms. You have this form group that you can initialize, and then you can put in your form controls or nested groups or arrays. So this was very straightforward, or is very straightforward in the TypeScript code. And then it seemed that reactive forms, like the name tells us, integrates better with RxJS streams. Although template-driven forms have exactly the same structure underneath and also have very good support for streams. But not everyone knows about that. And so there was like a reactive forms hype then in Angular, and we all, including myself, were telling everyone, if you do enterprise, you have to use reactive forms. So reactive forms is the solution that scales, and template forms is just for those two field forms. So, and I want to apologize at this point because I think today, I think it was not that fair to template-driven forms because there were a few trade-offs that we haven't really noticed. In template-driven forms, for example, the whole structure of your data is derived from the template. So template-driven forms are creating and removing the form control instances automatically for you. In reactive forms, you have to take care about this manually. If you want to remove a control or add a control, you have to do this in your code imperatively. And this is like where I say template-driven forms are far more declarative in the template than reactive forms are. And already take care about a lot of things for us. And maybe you now get an idea where this thing leads, or my talk leads. I was now thinking, there are good parts in template-driven forms. There are good parts in reactive forms. Can we somehow combine the best things of two worlds together? And I was also studying other frameworks, how, for example, React solves forms, and they have very cool libraries for forms in React that are existing. For example, modular forms, and they have like also a very an approach that is very tied to templates and also very type safe. And I brought a little demo with me so that you can follow the code samples along in the slides. I want to introduce you to Toolazon. So Toolazon, the idea of Toolazon is that you do your craft at your home. So you want to hang up a picture or hang up a lamp, and you need like a screw or a screwdriver or a hammer or maybe a saw or something like this. But you do not want to wait for Amazon to deliver this the next couple of days. Toolazon is like that you put in your order and automatically a message is delivered to a nearby store, and they come to you and bring the tools that you need like in a few minutes or hours. So it's supposed to be faster than Amazon. That's the idea of this product. And you have, of course, a few forms. You need to register to it, and you can like enter your data to it. And as you can see, if you press register right away, you have this nice validation here. And now we can oh no, it's not good to use your own name for that. So let's take him. So you can resolve the issues right after another. Then you have to repeat this email. So you will like have a related validation for the email and the email verification. So if this is not matching, then it also complains about the email. So then you can register, and then you can like select your products that you want to get delivered very fast. And this is, by the way, a form array, but done with template-driven forms. So we will see how this is done in just a few seconds. And then you can say, hey, send this to my current location. And then you're already done. So two-step buying process. So, and now I want to show you how this is basically done. And here I came up because template-driven forms is like a burned term. That's why I just was thinking about the new one, and that's why I introduced schema-driven forms. So the idea of schema-driven forms is to simplify the mental model of how we build forms and how we process data. So your component that creates or uses a form basically has two things, a model and a schema. And the model is how you already know Angular. So you do not have to know anything new in order to use this approach. You can use the ng form, the ng model group directive, as you already know. And the ng form just takes care about status updates and keeping your data in sync with your model. But what you also provide is a schema, and this is a new one. So you decouple the validation thing completely from the data. So you will never validate your form with Angular built-in validations anymore. You have a schema for that. And the schema is telling you how the form is structured and how the data should be, in which shape the data should be. And the form schema processes the data inside of the ng form, so they are somehow wired up magically. And then it runs the validations, and then it yields some errors, if there are any. And what the schema then does is communicating to the ng form, hey, you have errors to display, because the ng form does not do anything about errors anymore. So the form schema is communicating this back to the ng form. But this is just an implementation detail. So if you write forms with this approach, you will never see something like that. It's all done behind the scenes for you. A cool thing about introducing a schema is that we can enhance the API of our form with useful utilities. You can have a form updated event to keep your model in sync in the component if you want to work with your data even further, if you want to trigger some side effects or refetching some data because of a form change, you can hook into this form updated event. And another cool thing is that you can introduce a form save submit event. And this is a new event that is just executed when the schema is telling you, okay, the whole form is valid. Maybe you experienced this as well in Angular. If you work with forms, that you often find yourself in your component checking for this form invalid or this form valid again, or you need to do some further transformations with the data of the form. But this is not needed anymore because of the newly introduced APIs. You can even handle mapping and transformations inside of the schema to just pull out the data that you need. So yeah, and this is a simplified version of the image before. So what you can see here that we create a unidirectional data flow again. So we have the model that is passed to the ng form. The ng form passes value changes to the form schema, and the form schema finally updates the model again. So there's only one way, a one-way data binding. So you will see this, for example, that in the template, we won't have the banana in the box syntax of the ng model. We only write new data to the ng model, but do not listen to the changes of the ng model anymore, because the form schema is handling this for us. So schema sounds like an interesting idea, but how do we create a schema? And there are a lot of different possibilities that we can use, because there are a lot of very cool validation libraries out there that I think are even more advanced than the validation capabilities of Angular. Maybe some of you are already using some validation libraries. Maybe you can name one or two. Yup, okay. Zot, okay. Any more? Also the chat, of course, you're also invited to Superstruct. I've never heard of that. Thank you. So I want to introduce yet another one that I learned about, and this is what I use, but this is also an implementation detail. You can, of course, use whatever library you want to use. I am using Volleybot. Volleybot is like a modular and more tree-shakeable version of Zot, if I can say it like this. So it has nearly the same API, or it started with the same API surface than Zot, and then it was evolving from that. Volleybot is written by Fabian Hiller. He is currently living in New York, I guess. And he, I think, did a really great job. So this library like started from a bachelor thesis, and now it's becoming more and more popular in the developer community. And so that you're able to read, and maybe this is also the reason why I'm using this library, because it has this cool pipe method. And I also like RxJS streams. And so like I haven't to learn a new concept here. But this is like the mental model how Volleybot is creating a schema. So you can start with like saying you have a string, and then you can do that you expect that the value is a string. Then you can run actions on that, like you can trim the string, or can say, hey, this should be like validated for an email or something like this. And then you have, for example, here email schema. So you can compose your schema with lots of utility functions and methods, which I find really helpful. And if you remember the registration form that we have just seen before, so this is like a simplified version of our registration form where we can come up with a schema so that you say, okay, this should be an object and there is a first name, last name in it. And then I also have an email, and I want also the email to be verified to handle typos of the user a little bit more properly. And the cool thing about the schema is that the mental model applies pretty good to template-driven forms. So if you have just a plain field like first name, last name, obviously this is ngModel. And if you have an object, you can introduce an ngModel group in your template to tell, okay, I want to go one level deeper in my tree. So this is like a one-to-one match. And Volleybot is really capable of doing a lot of very complicated and complex things, like validating related fields. And you are free to add your own conditions. You can do asynchronous things inside of validation. And here I brought an example where you can see how the email and the verification fields are validated. And once again, this API is really awesome, because everything that you can read here, even the strings, are absolutely type safe. You cannot make any typos here. So if you use like email and you write email1, so you make a typo here, it will complain because this string is derived from the object property name right here above. So it's really hard to make something wrong in Volleybot. It will yell at you if you do something that's not intended to do. And what you can see here is that we have like a forward. So you want to forward an error. And here we can do a partial check. So we want not to validate everything in the whole object, just a few fields. And then I pass just the fields that I want to validate. I add my own condition here, how the validation should be run. And I can also provide a validation or error message if something is not correct. And finally, because we want to forward the error, we have to tell Volleybot where the error should be attached to, because the forward and partial check has no idea which field now is not correct. And here I decided to say, okay, this error should be shown at the verification field. You can also add multiple fields where you want to forward the error to. So yeah, but this is like how the API is working. And I also talked about that Volleybot is capable of doing asynchronous things. So nearly every operator or method has an async partner that you can use. For example, you could use like a custom validator with custom async, where you could like check if an email address is already taken or not, which is also very straightforward. And then you have to use the pipe async, because there are some asynchronous parts in your validation. And it's also very straightforward to combine this with Angular. You can still have your Angular services, like an email availability checker, if you like. And then you can like have a little factory function that is injecting this email service, and then you can create your asynchronous schema or validation out of this. Yeah. So this is just the API that you can use. You can either use the parse method. This will just throw an error if the validation fails, or you are using the save parse method. Instead of throwing an error, it will yield you a result object that contains the errors in a well-structured way that you can further process. The other cool thing is that Volleybot also comes with like utility methods or helpers where you can infer your types from the schema. So you have not to write your types additionally. You can just pass your schema to this infer output method or property, and then the correct JavaScript so the plain JavaScript object will be inferred for you. So, and this is like the model that you can use in your component right away. So this is like the schema creation process is done. And you will find a more exhaustive example in the code samples that I will give you after the talk. And now our challenge is to connect these schema and the model and make everything work with our form, right? So therefore, I introduced a directive that I called form schema, and the form schema takes the schema from Volleybot right away, and then it will process the schema. And then I have, when I use the form schema directive, I will also have this newly introduced interface, the form updated, where I get my updated data out of the form. So, and maybe you have noticed that we not only pass the registration model here, but we make it like partial, so deep partial. So everything is optional inside of the form currently. Why is that? Because I do not care. Why I do not care? Because template-driven forms will take care of creating the whole structure for me. I do not care about the form controls or form groups. And the schema will tell me if the data inside of the model is valid or not. So that's why I leave the complete control of the creation and removal process to the framework. I do not want to be bothered with that. And then I let my schema decide whether the form data is valid or not. And finally, we are binding our data model to the ng model, like we already know. And this is, like I said, just a one-time binding, a one-way binding, sorry for that, where we just see how the data flows into the form. Oh, now it's black. Okay, now it's not black anymore. Okay, and here you can see the unidirectional data flow again. Like we are just passing data to the form, and we will get notified by the form schema API about changes. Here I just wanted to show you the idea how everything is set up behind the scenes. This is the ng model, and how the ng model is listening for changes, so that the ng model knows that it has an error state or not, because we have not the validations on the ng model anymore. We now need to communicate to the ng model that it is in an error state. And what I do here is that I patch the existing ng model. So I look for the ng model attribute, and I just add a new directive to it. And since I now have the form schema directive on top of the form, I can inject this form schema. And the form schema knows exactly which errors are inside of the schema. And now I can make a match because I know the name of the ng model, and now I can look for errors in my dictionary. And if I find an error, I can tell the ng model, okay, now you have errors, and you now need to maybe display the errors. And this is basically everything. So you have like a stream that's provided, an error stream, and this is then consumed by the ng model itself. Maybe one little thing is, often in template-driven forms, I forgot to add the name attribute. So in template-driven forms, next to the ng model, you often need to place the name attribute, unless you make it like a standalone ng model. And here I just said that the name attribute is required, so that the editor or IDE already yells at me if I forget about this name attribute. So I cannot forget this anymore. Otherwise, you would see this failure at runtime in your error console that you missed the name attribute, but so it cannot happen anymore. And now I thought, okay, now we have the schema, everything is streamlined down to the button to the ng model. Why not finding a possibility to automatically display the errors? I do not want to handle this, if this error exists, please display this error for me. So I wanted to get rid of that. And that's why I introduced another directive. It's called the form field outlet. And the form field outlet can get a handle of the ng model inside via content children, for example. And the form field outlet then gets to know about when the ng model has an error state. And so I can make the form field outlet automatically render like a template where the error is displayed. So if you use this solution, you won't build your own template to display errors anymore, because everything is done behind the scenes automatically for you. Yeah, and then there's one more thing. Maybe you also experience sometimes that you are a bit in a hurry. It's Friday evening, you want to leave the office, and you just need to complete this one form, and you need to copy a lot of form controls to get your form ready. But then you have like the problem with a typo. And in template-driven forms, no one would notify you that you messed up the writing in your template, that you made a typo. It just won't work as you would expect. It creates automatically the wrong object structure with the typo for you. But with the schema, I now are in charge, or I can now have a good understanding of how the form should be like. And I also can identify controls that should not be in the schema. And that's why the schema is now capable of giving you a well-formed error message, including the path where a control is living that should not be there. And here in this example, I just made a typo in email. I've written this with a Y, and that's why I get at runtime a very good error message about this. Okay, and there's a text box that explains exactly that, what I have said. So, and now you may ask if we still have to those messy templates, what I was talking about in the beginning of the talk, because you have still all those building blocks of the router outlet, sorry, not the router outlet, but the form field outlet. You have to come up with your field sets and so on and so forth. But the good news about this is it's very easy to extract all of your form form aspects into other components, into nested components. There is a very easy trick where we can tell your ng form that it should listen to all the ng models that are nested in other components. And for example, you're absolutely capable of doing something like this, that you put all your basic things in a registration personal component, or the email fields in another component. The only thing thing that you need to know about is that you need to connect your children forms to the parent ng form. And you will find this implementation detail also in the code sample that is hosted on GitHub. I called it just an ng form bridge. And this is just like connecting your nested forms with the template form. And so you can do nesting as much as you like. And still, you can keep control about all your aspects of the form, and you can add implementation details and so on and so forth. And then there's another thing about the form array. So yes, currently at today's state, we do not have really arrays in template-driven forms, but this does not really matter because you can use records instead of that, like plain object literals with a key value. And you can also set this up in Balibot at the schema if you like. And here you can see how a list of products is set up. And this list of products is shown like here. And you can see how the products are then rendered or used or how the data structure of those products is. You have like a key. In this case, this is the product ID. And then I choose that I would just want to have the amount of how many things I knew. Yeah, obviously I need to have 6 new screws in my tool belt. So, and this is how you can deal with your lists in a form. So this, you only need to know about that. It's not really a problem. So yeah, and here you can see how it's derived from the schema. And yeah, here you can see how everything is bound to the template. You can still have your products list that you load from your API, and then you can iterate over your products. And then you just need to add your product card with this ng model, and everything works as expected. The only thing here is, I'm not sure if I haven't highlighted here. The trick here is that the name attribute is not really like product or so. You give the name like the ID, and this is the unique identifier in the record, and then template-driven forms knows where to put it in your object. So I basically think that we might have underestimated template-driven forms a bit the last couple of years. I think the schema approach really allows us to introduce cleaner code in our components. And we have much more type safety in our templates than before. Because I even feel like that the typed reactive forms haven't really solved our need for what we want to achieve in our projects. Yes, they are typed, but they are not really working very well in the flow, loading data from the API, processing them in the form, and getting the right data out and passing this to another API endpoint. And now we also have typo safety, thanks to the added runtime checks. And now I would like to offer you something. I haven't told Christian about that. I deeply apologize, but I have an idea. So the next thing that we could do with this is we could create developer tools for forms, basically, because with the schema, we have the data structure and we can like analyze everything, and we can provide a better developer experience to other developers, especially for huge and large forms where you forms that you do not really know as a newcomer to the project. But if you would have the dev tools, you could like inspect the model. You could inspect the validators that are applied. You could like inspect if there are some custom transformations in the schema that are used. Or you could like have a button that automatically fills out the forms just for developing purposes. And this is something that I would what I think of could be done in the community. Maybe we could meet at some point in the future, and then we try to build this form dev tools together at the ng Meetup Leipzig. So maybe this could be something that we can do or organize in the future. Yeah. The good thing about that, no one has to prepare a talk for that. So we just come here or somewhere else and we just start building this stuff. And then there's also something that I'm very curious about. So last week there was the NG Poland conference, and the Angular team pitched a new version or a laboratory try how they could improve forms with the Signal API. There is not much out until now, and it was also declared like, hey, we are thinking about new APIs, we are thinking about improving the story for the developers. But this is something that could hit next, that we have like signal-based forms. And I was very lucky to see that they already have like a same API surface like we do with the schema-driven forms. Schema-driven forms are already signal-based, as you have seen, and they are also now distracting the signal, the data, from the actual form, and they do not have the form group for that anymore. So maybe this is also something that will come in the future, and I'm sure that we will have a talk here as well about this. And yeah, and maybe in the end, a little bit of poetry, so to speak. So we are dealing with forms since software development exists and how the web exists, right? And also since 2016, we have Angular. And I really enjoy the journey or the ride, how lots of people try to improve the developer experience for teams and make them more effective and more productive. And often it's like finding the right level of extraction that makes your teams better. And that makes team also to love using your library. And this is like a never-ending story, because once the requirements or the surface is changing, the rest need to adopt as well. And these are topics, so how as a developer you have to deal with those circumstances. And these topics I tackle in a podcast, actually. So currently it's only available in German, but I'm working on that. So, if you are also into those topics like improving your communication skills or become more effective at your work, I would highly recommend to just give Entwicklungszeit a try. So there are a couple of episodes out there that you can already listen to. So, and I'm also happy to receive your feedback on that. And you are also free to send me like proposals for new topics. There's a form up there. And yeah, I am happy if you reach out to me to make this a cool place for coders to make a better developer life, basically. So yeah, this is the third QR code. I think this will be the last for this evening. If you scan this QR code or visit the URL that is printed there, you will get the slides of this talk, and you will also get the demo code of this talk. And yeah, I'm happy now to enjoy the evening with you all together. So thank you for listening.